So I read a lot of books when I was growing up, books that weren't for my age group. Like I read a lot of adult books, like novels, and I was just obsessed with reading. I loved kind of charting the journey of characters over time, which I think fiction allows us to do in such a beautiful way, to go into like the internal kind of psyche of a person and follow them for 300 pages. I mean, I just loved it. So that's really where my love of storytelling came from, was from reading. And it also came from writing poetry. I started writing poetry and short stories when I was very young, like a preteen, and it allowed me to kind of make sense of the world, of my emotions. I would write about my family, about things that affected me in different ways. And I continue to write poetry. I actually want to publish a book of poems soon. I have over, hundreds of them. So it was through poetry, it was through fiction that I found my love for telling stories about humanity and about just the gray areas of humanity, of what people go through in life. I've just always been fascinated by that, by family relationships, emotional connections that people have with one another, love, romance. Those are all things that I've always been interested in. So reading books and writing, and of course movies, but I really would say that reading was the way that I really got into being invested in story, was through books.
It's amazing. I find that's a place where a lot of people start, is falling in love with the world of storytelling through reading.
Mhm.
Can you tell us a little bit about how film first came into your life and how you kind of found that as a great medium for storytelling?
Yes, so film first came into my life, in terms of just watching movies. Going to the movies was one of the most exciting, activities that we had when I was younger. Growing up in the Bay Area, my father would take us to Grand Lake Theater, and he would take us to the matinee. And that was so exciting for us. We get popcorn, he would sneak in food. I remember seeing a movie called Malcolm X, when I was probably about 10 or 11, and that movie had such a big kind of impact on me. Growing up, my father's Muslim. I come from like an African American Muslim community in the Bay Area, and to kind of witness Malcolm X's journey, um, which had kind of a literary kind of presence to it, because it was kind of adapted from his autobiography, just really showed me the impact of what filmmaking, um, the impact that it can have on people. People in the audience were clapping, they were crying, they were, yelling at the screen. And I said, I want to be an artist, because I want to have that impact on people. I want people to leave affected by what I make. And so I think that's really subconsciously, when I was like, okay, I want to be a part of this, whether it's, being in front of the camera, being behind it. I just knew at that time I had to be a part of cinema, of storytelling. And I continued to watch a lot of movies. I didn't know I wanted to be a director and a screenwriter, though, until I was older. And I was in college, actually. I went to UC Berkeley. I majored in communications and African American studies. And I said, I want to take my poetry and my photography and go to something more epic and make movies. So through my poetry, creative writing background, and my photography, I did 35 millimeter photography. I merged those, and I said, I want to tell stories for the screen in terms of cinema. So I just took it a step further. I started teaching myself how to make films. I made my first short film in Oakland with my friends. I operated the camera myself, like I did it myself. And then from there, I got formal training through going to film school. So I went to film school at Howard University, and I went to film school at the California Institute of the Arts, where I got an MFA in directing and creative writing. So I got 2 MFAs, which is very crazy, but I figured it out. And yeah, it's just been a journey. It's always been a journey, just, being an artist.
Can you share with us what it was like in those early formative years as a filmmaker? Do you remember any specific big lessons you learned as a budding filmmaker? What some of your biggest takeaways you could share?
Yes, I think that one of the biggest takeaways is do not let rejection deter you from your dream. Don't let rejection tear you away from um, what makes you passionate and what keeps you going. I received a lot of rejection in my journey, and it's something that is just a part of it. A lot of film festivals, they rejected certain short films I made. I've, submitted scripts to certain competitions, and, it's something that, it's just a part of the journey. And you have to learn that if you truly believe in what you're doing, then no one should be able to take that away from you. So I really would say not to allow rejection to dim your light. Or other people, there's some people who didn't understand why I wanted to tell a story about, a Black girl coming of age, learning about Islam. There were people within a school environment, who didn't understand why I wanted to do that. And I couldn't allow those people to dictate what was important to me. And I think sometimes we have to understand that even when you're getting feedback, not every form of feedback is helpful to you. So you really have to just stay true to who you are and to what your purpose is, and know that you're kind of guided by something bigger than rejection or someone's limited idea of what you're trying to do. So I would really just say keep going at any cost. I think another thing is acceptance. A lot of times we really want to be accepted into certain film schools or certain groups or organizations. And sometimes we don't get that acceptance, but we find other people or other avenues that accept us in our work. And we should take advantage of that. So, it's good to be celebrated for your work, but that won't always come. So you really have to have something in your heart and spirit that is going to help guide you when you don't have acceptance, when you face rejection. These are things that, make filmmaking in any artistic medium very difficult for people. And I'm very sensitive and emotional, so I know how it feels. I take it very deeply, but I just have to keep going. Even at the stage I am in my career right now, where I work in TV, I work, this is what I do with my life. I still face, some rejection, and you just have to keep going.
Amazing. Thank you for all that advice. That was great. Since we are talking a bit about narrative filmmaking today, it'd be great if you could just give us an introduction to how you view narrative filmmaking and kind of what that style means to you.
Yeah, narrative filmmaking to me is about, going on a journey with a character who, is motivated by something, who is faced with a conflict that they have to figure out, they have to overcome or not. And it's something that I think in everyday life, we have these experiences. We have people who come into our life who might be blocking our path, or situations that might be stopping us from getting to what we want. And so when you apply kind of those experiences and the way that life kind of happens to the stories that you see, I think you understand on a very deep level how to kind of understand characters and the decisions that they make in the face of insurmountable conflict, in the face of, you have a movie like Titanic, which is a situation that those people could not avoid. They were on that ship, and it was sinking. But you see all of these different kind of human reactions to a situation, to a conflict, and how love can come out of that, how anger, how jealousy can come out of that. So I think for me, narrative filmmaking is a way to understand people and understand the world in a way that can impact an audience, and have the audience understand parts of themselves that maybe they weren't even thinking about when they sat in the theater or they sat down and watched that movie. You know, I've watched movies that have touched me so deeply, they made me remember parts of my life that I never even thought I wanted to remember. And that's the power of storytelling in cinema, is that it taps into something within us. A good story can really take us back to something and have us kind of struggle with it, or ask questions or be challenged. So I just think that narrative filmmaking, you know, you have the rules, you know, you have you things they say you have to follow. You have to have the character, the protagonist, the antagonist, the three-act structure, you know, plot point one, plot point two, the resolution. And I think that that's really important to when you're starting out, to know the kind of blueprint of how to write a script, of how to, you know, have script structure and those things. But at a deeper level, creating a story that really tries to explore humanity in these characters is what I try to do. I want to tap into complicated emotions of people. And in doing that, I can bring awareness to larger issues. You know, with Jinn, my feature film, this young girl, this young teenage girl is going through a lot in terms of her development and her sexuality, and wanting to be accepted and wanting love from her mother, and also wanting to learn about Islam at the same time. And the mother is really, really trying to be faithful to a religion. So you have two different belief systems coming from those two different characters. You know, they're two individual people, but they have two different ways that they are observing a religion. So I'm making a statement about religious observance within very specific character studies. So that's what you can do in narrative filmmaking. You don't have to make a documentary. You can just go deeply into character, understand why your characters do, why are they doing what they're doing? Why are they making decisions that they're making? I love doing that. I write character biographies. So I will write in the first person voice of my character. Where is my character from? You know, what is their favorite food? What experience have they gone through that has, um, you know, kind of changed their perspective on a certain thing or on life? So I really have to do that because I want to understand who my characters are, why they make the decisions they make, and just like how they're going to function in my story. So I think it's really important to understand character and to understand conflict. What is the conflict that they're facing in this film? If you do not have conflict, then you just don't have a narrative film. Conflict is very important. And I think sometimes, you know, I've been faced with criticism that, you know, well, we don't want to see negative stereotypes of, you know, Black women, or, and that's, conflict is not negative. Conflict is what life is about. And we have to get away from feeling like we have to have a positive, everything has to be positive. We can have very interesting characters who may not make the best decisions, but they reveal something about people, about humanity that we need in this story. And that's the function of a good villain. A good villain can really allow us to understand people better and relationships, because they are lacking in something that the protagonist has. So it's really about really thinking on those levels about conflict, character, drama, and really trying to, and sometimes it's emotional conflict. It's not like, oh, my car blew up and now that's an action movie, but it's an emotional conflict that I'm more interested in. Someone at war with their self, or at war with some issue that they can't figure out. Those are the conflicts that really are interesting to me. Family conflicts are really interesting to me. Romantic conflict. So that's a lot. But narrative filmmaking,
Oh,
it's
great.
so much. You know, you can do so much with your characters and your story. You know, even if it's a short film, a 5-minute film can, you know, make someone's whole day, you know, different because they saw what you did. You evoked an emotion in them, you know, from 5 minutes. So it doesn't matter if it's a feature or a short. It just matters that it is really trying to convey a purpose through your characters and through your screenplay.
You definitely just touched on it a bit, but I would love for you to go in deeper with explaining, a lot of times we think that documentary storytelling, it's very raw and it really talks about these issues in a very intense way, but narrative can also talk about very intense real issues, and you did touch on it, but in the backdrop of what's happening even just now in the United States with both coronavirus and a lot of these social justice movements happening, you know how can you still have a very powerful current event story and make that into a narrative film?
Yes, I mean, I think sometimes, like I said, in narrative film, a lot of times it's about the characters, right? The characters are anchors into your story. So even if you want to impart or kind of convey a bigger message about police violence or race or identity or the pandemic, we really need to be pulled into that by the characters. And having well developed characters is something that I really look, it factors very high in my practice, because I know that if that character is fascinating and interesting, then that audience will want to follow them. And an audience member who does not really know a lot about this big social issue will be intrigued enough to want to watch because they want to watch that character. So sometimes you just have to really adhere to kind of those narrative kind of concepts that really help keep a story together. And it's a lot of times it's character. It's also about just emotion. Like, we feel like certain emotions as human beings that no matter who you are, you're going to feel. So if there's love, if there's like a complicated love kind of angle in this story that's about a bigger social issue, wow, I'm going to tap into that. And then in tapping into that love story, I'm learning about how these people are fighting on the front lines of this social movement, this uprising. Like, I have a film that's about a woman who loses her brother in police violence. Like, and I wrote this 10 years ago. So you see that these issues continue to happen for Black people, for people of color. And you see how a family is impacted by losing a son to this type of violence. And my reason for doing that is to show it goes beyond headlines. It goes beyond a picture or what we see on social media. There's families that are struggling to live without their loved one. And so my bigger kind of purpose is, yes, it is police brutality, it is racism, it is all of these issues, but family is the core of the story. And so that's what I want to really show. That's why I'm telling the stories, because I want us to see how families love, and how when people pass away in that way, love is erased. They're not allowed to love anymore. And so that's my purpose. But I have a bigger social awareness and a bigger social kind of purpose behind me that is aimed at my community and people outside of it. So you really have to go, like I said, it's about the character, the story, and the emotions that will really help people to latch onto it and make it, in that way, a bigger story about social issues, which is what I do. I did with Jinn as well, my feature film.
Can you tell us a little bit about how, our youth filmmakers that are on this video chat are in the next day going to start brainstorming these ideas and what kind of stories they're going to want to tell. Can you tell us how you worked on cultivating your voice as a storyteller, and advice you would give for our youth that are starting to claim their voice and take up space in the filmmaking world?
Yes, I cultivated my voice by just doing it. Like I said, I wrote and directed several short films leading up to my feature. And even I made short films before I was in film school. So I kind of always had the attitude that I'm not going to wait for someone to give me permission. I'm just going to go and do it. That's always how I've always been as a person. So in doing that, I was cultivating my voice. I was taking chances on ideas that nobody signed off on. Like no one told me you should, make that short film about that. And that's great. I just thought it would be cool. So I think a lot of the cultivation is writing. If you have an idea, start writing. Even if you don't know how to write a script yet, you can write a short story, write a free form story, and then maybe do some reading. You have an organization like that can help you to transform it into a screenplay. And then if you have the tools, I know it's hard with the pandemic and social distancing, but when you have the tools to get out there and make it, do that. And the more you work and the more you create, the better you get. I mean, that's just the way it is in filmmaking. The more experiences you have with writing and directing and working with a team, the more prepared you are for the next one. So I really think it's about not waiting. There's no reason to wait until film school to, I mean, if you don't have the ability to create now, I understand, but I think start now and kind of get that experience. And it's about really, taking a chance on yourself, getting those ideas out any way that you can, writing and working with people. If you have mentors in your life, people you look up to, maybe they'll read your work. I was lucky to send some of my scripts and my stories to people who would give me some feedback, and that would help me to revise. Revision is a big thing. You have to revise to make something a better form of itself. So I really think that's the way to do it. I also think watching movies is such an education. Watching international films changed my life. Watching films from different filmmakers from around the world, because it showed me things that American cinema wasn't showing me, like the risk and the emotion that goes into certain films from international filmmakers just really resonated with me early on. So I said, I want to be a filmmaker that's not just trying to adhere to the American cinema model. I want to be an international filmmaker. So that's something that was important to me. Watching movies, reading books. So those are all the ways to cultivate your voice, is really to be a student of your medium, and then take a chance and write your own story and keep doing that.
Mm-hmm. I'm gonna ask Anjali or Esther if you could chat this. I know this is putting you totally on the spot, but do you have any recommendations that you would say for either reading or watching that either were helpful for you when, like you said, when you were starting out, or anything that you would recommend even now for our youth too?
Yeah, I mean, wow, that's a great question. Like I said, the movie Malcolm X is a great movie. It's a great, I don't know what it's rated, but it's a great character study, and it's in these times, it's really a meaningful film to watch. So if you haven't seen Malcolm X, I suggest you watch it. You can see how a character is developed over time. That is a character who starts off in one place, totally different than he ends up at the end. And that is something that is so beautiful about character development. And so I really would recommend watching Malcolm X. There's another movie. It's one of my favorite coming of age movies. It's called Pariah, and it's directed by Dee Rees. And it's about a Black teenager who is coming to terms with her sexuality. And it's also a family film. And it's just a beautiful film. And I think it's online, but it really, really shows that what I talked about, an emotional conflict that a character can have, family conflict, very well done. Dee Rees is an awesome director. So I would recommend those films.
Great.
There's another film called Raising Victor Vargas that I really like. It's a coming of age film set in Brooklyn.
Wow.
And Raising Victor Vargas is, in terms of performance, it is like, and these are actors who, this was like some of their first times acting in a feature. And the actor, I'm forgetting his name, who plays Victor, is just amazing. And I think you can learn a lot about performance from watching Raising Victor Vargas. But yeah, those are some recommendations that I would definitely.
All right, so I'm going to ask my last question before I open it up to the rest of everybody on this video call. I would love, Nigel, if you could share with everyone a little bit about your workflow, like when you're setting, when you have an idea and you're getting ready to either put pen to paper or start envisioning these characters. Can you share with us what your process looks like a little bit?
Yes. So my process, it depends. Like I said, I'm also a poet. So what happens is I have a lot of poems that led to films. Like I have a series of poems that led me to make Jinn, right? So they're poems that I was struggling with my identity, like I was writing about, how I was feeling about, growing up in this community, but not fully being a part of that community, which is kind of what Jinn is about. And those films helped me to get the courage to make Jinn, the movie. So sometimes it's about, I'll write something in a different form, like I write poems or I write a short story. I have 2 short stories that have become films. Wow. So I have a short story about a little girl living in the desert whose father's a truck driver and comes home and reunites with her mother. And that's from a short story called The Carnival. And that became Dream. So sometimes I don't like having to be burdened sometimes with just writing a screenplay straight out. I want to explore it in another form where a short story, I can kind of have internal dialogue in a person that I can't do in a film. And that helps me to develop my character. So I will do a short story or a poem and then bring it into a screenplay. Other times, I just start writing an outline. Okay. So outline, I go into Google Docs or whatever, software, and I get images in my head and I just start to type them out. Different moments and scenes that I have ideas for. Sometimes they're not even chronological, but I'll put it in that document. And day by day, I keep building it. And then I will eventually, it'll go in order. Sometimes I have outlines that are like 50 pages because that's me. Basically, I'm writing the whole script basically, but I don't want to. Sometimes when you get into a screenplay software too early, you can get it's like anxiety and you can like lose your way. So I don't like that to happen to me. I like to be fully prepared once I start writing a screenplay. So in order for me to do that, I have to get into a different media. Like I have to just write it free form, an outline or a treatment, without all of the screenplay structure. And then I will bring it. So I think something like, don't feel like you have to just write your screenplay instantly. Let the idea come to you and write it down. Even if you have a journal or some kind of tab, something you like to write by hand, get the thoughts out and then let it kind of simmer in the world and then start writing your screenplay. That's how I work. I like to, get it in another form first and then start the screenplay. That's really my process, but it's really about just receiving the ideas and giving birth to them in a way that, makes me feel that the story is coming through. But yeah, I work a lot with just, short stories, other forms, and writing treatments and outlines before I write a script. Really helps me because when you're writing a script, you can always refer back to the outline. If you lose your you lose your way, you're like, oh, okay, now I'm gonna get back into it because I have this outline. So it's exciting.
No, that's amazing. I love that you explain that there's not just one right way to do it. Like, you don't have to just jump into this very serious script writing structure from day one. I think that's great, especially for people who maybe have more creative outlets of storytelling. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
We're going to open this up, everybody. So I hope you all have some questions or anything you'd like Nijla to share or expand on about her writing and directing and filmmaking experience. And you can unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can chat it. And it would be great if the campers, all of you, when you share your question, if you could say your name and your age too, I think that'd be awesome so we can all keep getting to know each other. So this is your space, everybody. Do we have a bold person who's gonna ask the first question today?
I'll ask a question while everyone else is figuring it out. Hi, Nigel. It's Esther. How are
Hi.
you? As you know, Jinn is one of my favorite films, so I'm so grateful for you putting it into the world. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between directing a feature that you wrote and directing television?
Yes, definitely. So it's very different. It's very different because when you direct your own I directed an independent film too, so I had a lot of power versus a studio film. So directing an independent feature film, you are calling the shots. If you're the director, writer, and I also was a co-producer, you are, in control of almost everything. The creative vision, you don't have anyone telling you what you can do because you're basically raising the money yourself. So everybody who contributes money to that film is in alignment with what you want because they've read the script and they understand. So, I was also, really involved in casting. I was in locations, like every aspect of Jinn, I had a hand in and I had a control. The other flip side of that is that working in independent film, a lot of times you don't have a lot of money. So you're kind of struggling to get by, but you have the most freedom. So that's like the kind of gamble that you take there. When you're directing for television, in terms of television, writers have the most. I'm sorry, someone's calling me. In terms of directing for television, writers have the most power in TV. So if you come in as a director on a show, I've directed for a show called Insecure and a show called Queen Sugar. So working on those shows, you have to adhere to kind of what the writer wants for the episode. They are kind of above you. And so you definitely bring your ideas and you bring your creative insight, but they will definitely tell you kind of how they want certain things to be shot, how they want certain performances to come through. And that, for me, coming from an independent film background, was a little disorienting because I'm so used to having like 100% control over everything creative, but not in TV. But what's beautiful about working in TV is that, like I said, it's financially, you have a lot of resources. You have anything you kind of want to try, you can try in TV because they have it there. And you're learning to kind of collaborate in terms of the visual style of a show that's already set up. You're learning to kind of keep that going, but also bring something new, which is kind of difficult sometimes. Like, you want to bring your voice, but you also have to build on what's already been established for the show. So I love working in TV. Like, I've had great experiences, but I think I would always love to direct my own movies more and write my own movies because I have that amount of creative control and kind of like authority that I don't have when I'm directing for TV. I'm answering to people in TV. So it's different, but TV is really a great space right now. There's so many great stories to be a part of on TV. So if that's something you want to explore, it's a great way to make a living because you can be paid, a good amount working in TV, and sometimes in independent films, it's a more uncertain life. So, that's the reality of why, filmmakers direct for TV.
Hi, my name's Clarissa. I'm a producer right now for the camp and a summer intern, but I went to camp for I've worked with them for like the last 7 years. I was a camper for 6 years. But my question is, you talked a lot about character development, and when you're directing a TV show or just directing something that you haven't written and you don't have control over the dialogue, how do you try and portray a depth to the character through their acting and like body language?
Yes, definitely. So when I'm directing an episode of a show, there's several steps that I go through in order to understand characters in my particular episode. So it's really important for me I have to read all of the scripts that came before mine, so I understand fully when it gets to my episode, why, like, what's happening. Like, I need to know the context. Why are people acting the way they are? Why is this conflict happening in my particular episode? And from reading all of those previous episodes, that informs kind of what the motivations are once they get to mine. And then I also will kind of just read it on my own and kind of try to put my own kind of ideas and interpretations into the script that I'm given without asking any questions. This is just me coming in as a director and reading it and having these thoughts based on my own experience. So I do that. And then I have a meeting. There's a meeting that you have with the writer of the script called a tone meeting. And in that meeting with the writer, they basically let you know what they envision for different scenes. They let you know how, like, why characters are feeling the way they are, why characters are making this decisions that they are based on what they envisioned when they were writing it. So you have to listen to the writer, and you know, they give you that information, and then you have to bring your own insight as a director into the kind of assessment of the script. But it's really about that, and it's about watching the show. If the show is on the fourth season, you need to watch all the seasons prior to that up to your episode, so you fully understand the trajectory and the arc of the characters throughout the whole show. And if you do that, you'll be in a perfect place to be able to direct the actors once they get in your episode, because you'll understand fully how they got to this point based on all of the episodes prior, based on all the scripts you read and the conversations you've had with the writer and your own wisdom about character and development. So it's, you know, it's a process, but if you're going to direct for TV and you want to get great performances, you really need to understand the characters as written from the beginning of the season and why, you know, what they've been facing, because that will directly impact your episode.
Amazing. Thank you. I believe a youth messaged me saying they have a question. So Grace Kelly, do you want to unmute yourself and share your question?
Hi, I'm Grace. I'm 15. I want to go into film, and I know that I want to go to like film school and stuff, but I'm not really sure where to go after college. Like, where do you suggest, what place do you suggest people out of college should be if they want to go into film?
Yes. Out of, like, after you finish your undergraduate studies?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's so many kind of, you know, different film schools that you can look into. I know when I was on my journey, I explored, film schools like UCLA and NYU, Columbia, Howard University, which I actually went to, was a HBCU that I did 2 semesters there. It was like really a life-changing experience before I did Cal Arts. I explored Cal Arts. There's Florida State, where Barry Jenkins went to film school. There's a lot of film programs at at SF State. San Francisco State has a really awesome film program that's great, you know, kind of activist-oriented, documentary, experimental. So there's film programs at community colleges that are amazing. I know people who went to community college who had a great film school education. So at this point in my life, I'm now in my 30s, I don't really get caught up in kind of like the names, you know, the big ones and stuff like that. I think wherever you can go, where you feel you can get a good education, where you feel you can get a team to work with you and they have equipment is a big thing. They have the most recent film equipment. That's a good place. You know, I don't think it's about when I had a point in my life where I wanted to go to NYU or UCLA so bad. And I thought that it was the end of the world if I didn't get into those programs. And I didn't get in, but I'm fine now. So don't get caught up in, oh, I have to go to, if you get into them, great. Like USC, I have a lot of friends who went to USC, and that's a great program as well. But it's sometimes it's about, what do you want to get out of it? If you visit a program and you get a good feeling and you know that they're going to support you and you can make work that's going to withstand the test of time, it doesn't matter what, if it's NYU or Long Beach State or whatever. So I just think, go to a place where you think you can grow as a storyteller. And even if you can't go to film school, that's fine too. Many people don't go to film school, and Ava DuVernay did not go to film school. So you have to know that not everyone's gonna go, but if you wanna go, just go to a place where you feel you can grow and you have film equipment available to you, and you have supportive colleagues and faculty that are going to give to you and really want to see you succeed. That's what I would advise for even if it's not even a film school. There's just programs, there's nonprofits that will help you too. So that's what it's about to me now. I don't care about names or whatever. I just care about, can I make films that mean something to me? And that's what matters.
Thank you.
Hello.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I was just gonna, it's kind of like a follow-up question to Grace's question about like going into the industry. I was wondering if you could kind of explain your process of entering the industry and if you had any challenges within it.
Yes, that's a great question. So in terms of the industry, sometimes that's a kind of big, scary thing. My journey, because I still consider myself very much an independent artist. Like, I work very independently of the industry for most part, but through TV and through, some of the films that I have coming, I have, access into the industry now. But I feel like I worked so long outside of the industry, kind of doing what I love, that now, I'm at a point where I can kind of be a part of it. But the way that I kind of did that was through making my own work and staying true to myself. So making Jinn, my debut feature film, allowed me to be recognized by people within the industry. But that was, like I said, staying true to myself. I made a film that I wanted to make, that explored themes that I had never seen before in a film. And in doing that, people in the industry said, oh, wow, like, now I want to, talk to this person. But the kind of flip side to that is that I don't know if I tried to make Jinn within like a studio environment, I don't know if it would have came out the way that it did independently. So I really think it's important to, in order to, if your path is to become a studio director, and you have, Kathy Yan coming on, actually, she was in a program with me and she's like an inspiration of mine. Stay true to yourself up to that point, make the films that you want to make that speak to you and speak to what you believe. And that is how I feel you will unlock the key to being in the industry. Because all the filmmakers that we know today, they made films that they felt passionate about. And then they were able to make bigger films and work on TV shows and make bigger, Marvel movies or DC Comics movies, because they made films first that they wanted to make, that they loved doing. And I think that's how people gravitate toward filmmakers and want to become your agent or want you to direct their $1 million movie, is because they saw that you loved what you were doing before you got to, be in the industry. So that's really my advice for that, is really to make something that's gonna withstand the test of time, that people know who you are when they watch that film. And I think, a director like Ryan Coogler, that's a great example of that. Made Fruitvale Station, made Creed. Those are two very personal films and very, socially, aware films that really kind of show who he was as a director. So when it was time for him to make Black Panther, you know, you could see where that passion came from.
Hello. Um, my name's Yasman. I'm a program coordinator. I'm 22. Before I ask my question, I just want to totally agree with your answer, Nijla, to Grace's question. Having been to Berkeley City College for 2 years and then just graduating from the film program at UCLA, I seriously think that the BCC, the Berkeley City College film courses, especially their film studies, were much higher quality than the ones at UCLA. So it's what you make out of it. They care more, and you're gonna have such a diversity of age and race and sexualities more at a community college than if you go to a big university like that. So awesome. My question is, when you're working on projects that are so personal and you've written the scripts and you've done the character backgrounds and you're so in the minds of your characters, how do you relay that or let the actors take that? And I'm really interested to see the relationship that you have with the actors and what you let them or don't let them do with your characters.
Right. I really consider myself very much like an actor's director. I really love to form strong bonds and relationships with my actors so they can trust me to be vulnerable, because I have scenes in my films, especially in Jinn and in my upcoming films, where if trust is not there, then the performance will not work, because they don't want to go that deep into something and not have a director who can look them in the eyes and be vulnerable back with them and be truthful. So I really, really try to form a connection with, even in TV, if sometimes in TV you're meeting the actor the first time when you're shooting. So you don't even have any time. But if I can maintain eye contact and I can be sincere in talking to them and really trying to work with them, then I feel like I have succeeded, because then they want to give the best. So with Jinn, what I did is I made those connections with my actors and I allowed them into the kind of the backstory of Jinn and of their characters in a way that they felt the characters were real to them and very much, some of them really related to the characters. Like the actors who played Summer, Zoe Renee, she just felt like Summer to me. Like she felt so connected to Summer as a person. So I think that made her performance so real. I allowed her to read some of my poetry that I wrote when I was a teenager. I showed her some photos of my family, of my father. And I like to do that because that helps the actors fully embody their role. So I think, I've heard of some directors where they like to withhold information and, they get on set and maybe that's the first time an actor reads a scene. And I think that's a beautiful approach as well, because I've seen some films that have done that and I love them. But for Jinn, my feature film, I thought it was very important for these actors who some of them were not familiar with Islam. They weren't familiar with what I was talking about, for them to really understand it, especially about Islam, a religion that is so maligned and misunderstood in the world. They should come into it knowing something. So I provided them videos, pictures, things that bring humanity to the religion so that they can play their character. Like an actor like Kelvin Harrison Jr., who played the love interest in my film, he had to be a devout Muslim. So I really want him to understand what that is. So I really gave him materials that helped him to get there. But for me, it's about really forming those connections, because I want them to be vulnerable in their performance. But if a lot of times actors won't do that unless they feel comfortable with their director. And I never want an actor to feel like, they weren't prepared or they weren't comfortable enough to give the best performance. So that's really my approach up to this point. But I'm open to trying other approaches, because I feel like it's always about learning and trying new things. But that's been my approach so far.
Amazing. We have about 9 minutes left. So this is your last chance to get in some questions with Nijla. Any of our producers or program coordinators can for sure ask questions too, because I know this is day one. So I totally understand that this is our first experience on Zoom today as a group. So you can always chat questions too. And then any of our producers can always jump in and ask a question as well in these final minutes.
Hi, Nijla. This is Scully. Let me change this real quick. Sorry, I'm gonna see you. Okay. It is such a pleasure to have you on here. I like all of these wonderful things that you're sharing with us. It's really amazing to hear like your process of how you bring in your poetry, all the passions that then end up combining into your films. And I was curious to kind of get a bit more, or hear a bit more about how photography and your poetry end up like, you know, in your stages of creating a story and like developing your characters. Do you find you bring in photography in that? And it was like really great to hear that you use photographs to communicate to your actors too, and to give them a sense of like who the character is in the background. And I was curious if there was a little bit like, do you find yourself taking pictures, and like how do you use photography in that, as well as like maybe a bit more about your poetry as well?
Yeah, so like I said, with the development of the story, I really I lean on poetry, short stories, and sometimes photography to get me to kind of generate an idea. Like I have a wedding photo of my mother and father, you know, and they have on like traditional kind of Islamic garb in a wedding. And that photo also was a part of the development of Jinn. So being able to use a photo and the details and specificity of a photo to tell a story is really important to me. When I'm kind of like, locations are really important to me, location specificity. So one of my trips back to the Bay, because I have an upcoming film that's set in the Bay Area, I went to all of the locations that I want to shoot in. And I just took so many photos. You know, I was in the Berkeley Rose Garden taking pictures. And for me, it's so important to have those images because the location sometimes informs so much about character, about why these people are in this time and place. Like, what does this mean? So I use photos for locations. I use them also to create kind of mood boards and vision boards and lookbooks. So I use a lot of my original photography when I'm trying to convey to like an investor or a production company or someone like a financier my vision. I have to, you know, we have to make lookbooks. And a lot of times in my lookbooks, I use my own photography that I've done. And I used to do documentary photography a lot, 35 millimeter. I developed and printed it myself. And so a lot of those photos come in handy for me now because the emotions in some of the photos, like just everyday moments, conveys the emotion of a particular scene or idea that I have in my film. So it's really, it's really important to me. I think the links between photography and poetry for me and filmmaking is about imagery, right? So you're creating images in all of these different forms, whether you're taking a picture, you're writing a poem, or you're writing a film. You are really, really in tune to imagery and to sequencing and to language. Even in a photograph, you know, there's a certain language that it's speaking. So I link it all together. For me, it's all like a continuum. I know like some people are like, how does poetry even relate to film? But the poetics of film, I mean, film and poetry for me are very similar. And a lot of my films, my poems are kind of like films in a way. They're telling a story. They, you know, have a buildup sometimes. They have emotional depth. They have a character. So I just see it as kind of a, something that's all linked together. I don't see it separately. And I use, like I said, I use photography and poetry in different steps of the process, development through editing. Editing is kind of like editing a poem, because in editing, you are taking out, you're basically revising. You're revising a film when you edit it, because you have to reimagine something based on what you have. And that's very similar to me to editing writing. So
that was great. Thank you. So we actually have 2 questions that were typed in the chat, and then one student who's gonna unmute themselves and ask a question. So I'll just go in order since the 2 chat questions came in first. One was from our student filmmaker, Tesla, and she asked, have you always wanted to pursue film?
No. No. Like when I was younger, I wanted to be a singer. First, I wanted to be a singer. I love dancing. I wanted to be a dancer. And then filmmaking was not a career that was presented to me when I was you guys' age as a career. When I was young, it was about, all we knew was about like being an actor. We didn't know about screenwriters and directors where I'm from. So basically, I didn't know I wanted to be a filmmaker until I was in college. Like, I knew that the power of cinema, I love movies, I loved all that, but I didn't know I wanted to pursue a career until I was at UC Berkeley. So that's, the truth of that. But I knew I wanted to be an artist since I was, I knew I wanted to be an artist, a dancer, a singer. I wanted to have my own magazine. I still write journalism. I'm still a journalist. I write like film criticism. So I knew I wanted to be a part of the arts and keep doing that, but I didn't know a filmmaker until I was at UC Berkeley. So sometimes you don't know, it's okay to not know what you want to do. But just take the journey and, you'll find a way.
Amazing. And then our next typed question, before we have one of our youths unmute themselves and ask a question. This question was sent in from Julia, who asked, when writing a story or script, how do you connect to characters whose life stories or identities are not connected to your own?
That's such a great question.
So good.
Yes, because that is a great question. So how do I connect to characters who are different than me or life stories are not my own? I think it goes back to trying to understand people on kind of a human level, right? Like context. And that's where building a character biography is important, right? So if I start to build a biography of where this person is from, what they've went through in their life, what is their family like, I can understand why they make the decision they make in my story. So even though what they've been through is so different than what I know, I understand them because I understand what their situation is, what is their context, what their family situation was like. I might not agree with what they've been through or the decisions they're making, but I understand it because I understand them as a full person, as a human being. So I think it's really important, if you're creating characters who are unlike you, who come from a different world, to fully develop them, write a character biography, do some research. If they have a profession that you don't know anything about, interview somebody who's from that profession. Because the more information you know about different people who are not like you, the better you can help to kind of represent them. And this can become an issue because a lot of times people say you should not tell stories about people who are not like you, or who experience is different. But I think that's also the beauty of storytelling, that I can tell a story about a police officer and have that character be understood because I tried so hard in terms of my research, in terms of understanding that person, to give them a motivation. Now, do I want to tell that story? Probably not. But I'm saying that it's important for me to understand the motivations of a person and where they come from, if they're different from me, in order for me to fully kind of plot their journey in my film. So I would say, yeah, it's really that's really, really understand their emotions too, understand how they feel, and kind of what makes them hurt, what makes them happy. And that's how you can relate to them on a human level and not on a superficial, oh, this person is not like me, so I don't have anything in common.
That was amazing. Great question. Great answer. And then Sanam, I believe you said you were going to unmute yourself and ask the final question for us today.
Hi.
Hi.
I was wondering if you can expand a little bit on the difference between international and American films and how you try and put that into your own films.
Definitely. So I feel like they're in international, that's such a big term, and there's so many countries and cultures and everything that goes into that. But I think, and just in terms of risk taking, I think the international film, the films that I watch from like the UK or Latin America, they're not afraid to just fully invest in something, you know, like in terms of censorship. I think censorship in American cinema, respectability politics, that can really like diminish a story. And there's a lot of international films I watch that do not adhere to that at all. They don't adhere to like kind of conceits around like emotion, like melodrama. I've watched some of the most emotional films ever from like international filmmakers, where the idea that something is too emotional is thrown out the window. And so I really appreciate that kind of film where they're not trying to cater to and, you know, some kind of rule or norm. They're just doing what they want to do. Pedro Almodovar, that's a great filmmaker who is just like, I'm going to, you know, probably not every film, but some of the beautiful films that he's done have been so true to what he wanted to do and have no concern for rules or, you know, norms or ideologies that are not in line with what he is trying to do. So I just think I'm a fan of that. And dialogue, silence, not having people talking all the time through a film. I've seen films that had very little dialogue that were so effective, you know, that weren't made in America. So I think, like I said, it's about taking those chances and not being scared to alienate an audience by being the artist that you want to be. And so that's why I really, you know, encourage to watch so many different films that are not made in America.
Amazing. And before we wrap, and thank you, Nijla, for this time. I mean, obviously, huge benefit in our youth are just so excited. We're just seeing the chat and all these amazing questions. So you all have done just great. And Nijla, your time has been amazing. So Esther has one final question before we send off and break for lunch.
We'll work through. Again, Nijla, thank you so much for your time and all of your insight. So we have filmmakers, the group that are, you know, this is their first day of filmmaking camp, and we have young women who have been part of our program for years. All right, cool. I'll chat with you later. Considering this to be their career. What, you know, and we're ranging from ages of 12 to 21. So what sort of advice do you have for all of them to just think about like what the next steps are going to be? And then it's just as a follow-up to that, and for context, like, so we're just talking about right now, this morning, since this is like, you know, we're at such a pivotal moment in our history with multiple crises on top of crises, and yet so much change is on the horizon. And I feel like marginalized voices need to be amplified even more so that we don't look back on this period 5 years from now and 10 years from now and only see a white male historic perspective. So like, can you give them any advice on as they move through being storytellers and content creators?
Right. I would say this is your time. I mean, it's always your time, but right now is the time for like our voices to be heard. And I think sometimes as women and, you know, young women, we'll hold back, you know, we don't want to be seem too aggressive or have, you know, say too much or do too much. But I really would advise not to do that, to really own your story and your voice in this time. If you have an idea, if there's something in society right now that you wake up every morning and you think about and you struggle with, or you just really want to explore, do it. You know, don't wait, because it's your time to have your voice be heard. And like I said, if you don't have all the pieces figured out yet, maybe you just have, you know, a paragraph idea, or you have a poem, or maybe just images that come to you. Write them down and just start somewhere. Because I think some of the great people we look to in terms of filmmaking and art, they all had to start somewhere. So I would say that this is your time, and don't be afraid to take up space and own your space as a young woman, of color, because it's this is the time for us to really claim space, and really tell our stories. Because when years go past and people look back on this time, they're going to look to stories. You know, they're going to look to the people who documented this time and documented the frustrations and the love and the anger and the isolation and the pain. They're going to stories have through time. That's what people go back to. They read, they watch, and we're going to be a part of it, you know, because we are the people in the middle of this. So I would just really encourage you not to be scared and not to be fearful or feel like people don't understand you or anything. Just be brave and take a chance, and take a risk on telling your story, whatever that is, because that's really those stories are going to be the ones that people return to years from now. I know I will. So that's really what I would encourage.